Hi, and welcome back to the second edition of the Sustainable Future Summit. I'm Joshua Pisana, the senior policy reporter at POLITICO, dealing with mobility issues. So we have the final session of the day today, dealing specifically with the issues of a key technology to drive the clean transition, batteries, and how that can help meet demand for electric car producers in the future. So I should remind you that we have the Swap Card app in terms of questions you want to pose to our panelists throughout the discussion over the next hour, and also a poll, which is quite pertinent to the debate we had earlier in the day. What is a realistic date to set as an EU phase-out target for petrol and diesel cars? Should it be 2030? Should it be 2035? Or should it be 2040? Or should there be no phase-out date? We couldn't really get Commissioner Vălean to commit earlier, but perhaps you can tell us what you think. That's in the Swap Card app, and we'll come back to the results later. So there is nobody better, I think, to discuss these issues than the Commission's Vice President for Institutional Affairs and Foresight, but often called the EU's battery man, owing to his determination to get domestic battery cell production up and running in Europe. Then Maroš Šefčovič, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
So my first question for you, for a quick 10-minute chat before we welcome our other panelists, is you have said recently that you reckon by 2025 there'll be enough battery cells produced in the EU to meet demand from car producers. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It was my pledge, and I think we'll be still here around to see how right I was. And I can tell you on what I based my answers, because when you look at what ASEA predicts would be needed for the production of the e-vehicles by 2025, so they are targeting something around 234 gigawatt hours of batteries. And by then, we see that for sure will be well over that bar, will be somewhere around 330 gigawatt hours or more. And just to put it into the perspective, what it means, this is, the quantity which would be enough for producing around 6 million electric vehicles in Europe already by 2025. So I think we will be not only able to really respond to needs of the European car industry, but I believe that by that time we can become very solid exporters of the batteries to the outside markets.
And did you think when you started this, the so-called Battery Alliance, which looks to use EU funding to get companies to set up battery cell plants, when you started this 3 years ago, did you expect that this target would be possible?
Honestly, of course, I am a very optimistic person and always aimed for the highest targets, but it goes beyond my expectations. I think that it just clearly demonstrates that we came, I would say, at the right moment with a good idea. And I have to say that we put the needed ingredients in what was needed for the creativeness, innovativeness, and that business drive in our industry. And now we see that almost all key industrial actors in the whole value chain, from mining through battery cells productions down to the recycling and use, all are part of this big effort, and therefore I'm so optimistic about the figures.
And so, of course, relocating production or having production located in Europe along the supply chain is part of your mission. Also, making sure that there's sustainability criteria for so-called green batteries in future. Next week, you'll table legislation about this. I wonder what can you tell us is going to be inside that legislation when you publish it next week?
I think what clearly will be the goal of this legislation is to make sure that Europe will be the producers of the most sustainable, most performance and safest batteries on this planet. That's, I would say, very ambitious goal, but I'm very convinced we are going to achieve it. So we are targeting all parts of the value chain, as you rightly pointed out, the sustainable, ethical mining. Then, of course, the carbon footprint, which is very important when you produce the batteries. But then, of course, we put a lot of emphasis on reuse and recycling, where we also want to make sure that we would gradually bring in, thanks to this regulation, the demanding thresholds, which would be motivating and stimulating for the industry to recycle the materials and to reuse all these critical raw materials which we need so much. We also want to make sure that we will have very good oversight over the what's happening in the battery world by making sure that each battery would have its own passport. So we will see if that was ethical, what was the carbon footprint when the battery has been manufactured, and I believe that it would be part of the green procurement strategies we are developing, but also I think very important information for the consumers and for environmentally very conscious demand and public in Europe.
Is there a concern, though, that when you put in place new green requirements for batteries, this raises the price of each cell, and actually in the end, European, at least on price, European-made battery cells won't really be competitive with dominant producers at the moment, for example, in China?
I think what's very crucial for this is that you're right. Until today, the price is the only criterion, and honestly, I don't think it's right. If we want to respect the Paris Agreement, if we want to go to the carbon climate neutrality by 2050, if we want to reduce the carbon footprint from the whole transport industry by 90% in 30 years. So then we have to have a little bit wider criteria. And I believe that price, of course, will be a very important one, but we want to make sure that every battery which is placed on the EU market would meet these very demanding ethical requirements if it comes to mining, but also very high environmental standards. And I believe that in the end, these green credentials and safety credentials of these batteries would be a selling point for European cars and European batteries, not only in Europe, but I would say on the global market.
And so far, the Battery Alliance Initiative has seen the approval of 3.2 billion in state aid to various projects across Europe. There's a second one being developed that I want to ask you about in a second. But I wonder, when you talk about state-funded subsidies of this amount, are you worried that some other global players, especially in a febrile international climate with trade wars and these concerns, are you worried that dominant producers in China, for example, are not going to be very happy with the level of state aid to the European industry?
I think if you compare how much investment came into the battery sector from the state in the form of state aid and from the private investors. So this is really, I would describe it as some kind of stimulus money, because altogether we looked at the projects which are going through the European Battery Alliance until now. So we are talking about 100 billion of euros of investment channel into the project in the whole value chain. And I would say well over 90% of them are private investments, or this is a financing which is coming from the banks. So I think that we see that here it's private equity, private initiative, which is really doing the most of the funding, because they see that this could be actually a very important competition feature. And the fact that Europe has become the hot zone for battery investment is just demonstrating the fact that already second year in a row we outperform the investment into the battery sector if you compare it to the China, and not by a narrow margin. I mean, the last year it was 3 times as much as in China. This year, so far, it's twice as much. So, I mean, and these are the investments which are coming from private equity, from different financial funds, and it's quite clear that this is the I would say new technological frontier which we are opening right now, and Europe really wants to be at the forefront.
And so, from your side, there's not going to be in a few years' time a battery trade war?
I don't think so. I think that there will be still quite big demand for the batteries, because I think that the auto world, we are sitting in auto world, so the world of car manufacturers is realizing all over the world that the future is electric, be it really battery powered, of hydrogen power engines in the cars, trucks or trains, and therefore the demand would be quite steep. But at the same time, I think what would be very important, I'm sure, especially for the generation of the young Europeans, this would be the green credentials of the cars they're going to buy for their families. They want to have the whole story. So we are not thinking only about the carbon footprint for the batteries, but for the whole cycle. how the batteries produce, what kind of electricity is used for powering the batteries. That was my job over the last 5 years when I was working on energy unit. But also we are working on the issues like green steel and all the products to make sure that overall carbon footprint of the European vehicles would be gradually going where we want to go, close to zero.
And just a final question on this before we bring in our other panelists. We spoke already about the first phase of the Battery Alliance and the amount of cash that was approved. There is, of course, a second, even larger one that's long been in development. You said the other day that you're hoping to get this by the end of the year. We have just a few weeks left. Do you think the German government, which is corralling all of the companies and countries together to make this proposal for state aid approval, do you think they're going to deliver it by the end of the year?
I definitely hope so. We still have 1 month left, and I had a chance to discuss it lately also with Minister Altmaier. I know that he's in very intense consultation also with my colleague, Executive Vice President Margaret Vestager. And, this is a rather complex exercise because you rightly pointed out that, first, IPCEI, as we use the abbreviation for this type of state aid, there were investment from state coffers, 3.3 billion. Altogether, it was more than 8 billion euros. But here we are talking about something bigger. We are talking about twice as many countries, probably 3 times as many companies, and of course to sort everything out and to make sure that very high criteria for the quality of the project, for what the DG Competition is pushing very strongly for this is innovativeness of the individual cases, that it's all in place. And of course, it requires quite extensive negotiations, but we are really very close to the finishing line. Of course, I would be extremely pleased if it would be before the end of the year, and definitely we from the side of the Commission will do everything that this will really happen.
So a lot of cash going into this industry. Let's put in our 2 panelists who are with us by video link today. So we have Emma Nierenheim, who's Chief Environmental Officer at Northvolt. And of course, Northvolt is one of, if not the flagship project of the Battery Alliance, a huge battery cell production plant being developed in Norway. Also another project being developed with Volkswagen. And then we have Julia Poliskova, who's a Senior Director for Clean Vehicles and E-Mobility at Transport Environment, long pushing for electric mobility. If I could start with you, Emma, just to give our viewers a little bit of a flavor of what the project is and how you're trying to develop sustainable green batteries in Sweden.
Okay, thank you. So when it comes to Northvolt, what we're trying to do here in Sweden is that first we're building up the first industrialization plant that has material preparation as well as assembly piece. So that's already commissioned, and then we are, as we speak, building the Giga plant in northern Sweden on 100% renewable energy from hydropower and wind power. The company has been here now for a little bit more than 3 years. We have started up this journey towards building the new base industry in Europe. It's amazing to hear the words from Vice President Šefčovič on all the sustainability criteria mentioned, closing the loop, the circular economy, to really put the European industry in EV market and in battery production as a differentiator when it comes to sustainability compared to the rest of the world. We have to remember that when we started this journey, when we started the company and when battery production came to Europe, Europe was a little bit behind. And I think that the reason is that there was a little bit of a hesitation that can we do this in a way that we add the actual sustainability to the transport sector, that the transport sector was what was asking for. We came out of a situation with the Dieselgate. We had some studies showing that the battery in an EV globally had a high footprint, not only in sustainability and carbon footprint, but also an ethical footprint. So there was a discussion on how we source the minerals and where this supply chain would end up if we go giga scale and transform this industry too fast. So what we have been doing is to really put up a strategy for how to resolve not only the carbon footprint piece, but also for sustainable sourcing of raw materials, and in particular for keeping the raw materials that we have once sourced in the loop and bringing them back into the next generation of battery production.
And so, Julia, just to tackle this head on to start with, I know you do a lot of work on the relative emissions of petrol or diesel cars, also on electric cars, and there have been some reports that suggest that actually when you measure the whole environmental impact of electric cars and the batteries produced there, then there is some competition with petrol and diesel. What's your take on this, and what's your research shown you?
Thanks, Joshua, and hello, everyone. So we can talk about it the whole day, and I think the debate around what's better in the life cycle has long been around Europe, but it is really time to put it to rest. Every independent latest life cycle analysis clearly shows that electric vehicles already today are far more superior in terms of their life cycle CO2 emissions than diesel or petrol cars. On average, an electric vehicle is 3 times better today in Europe, and even when batteries are sourced from China and vehicles are driven in Poland, even then they are at least 1/3 better. And this will only improve as we improve our processes and we make batteries production more sustainable, and as we decarbonize our grids and get more renewables. In fact, when we look at the so-called battery debt of the electric vehicle, you pay it off in Europe in driving for less than 2 years. And there's been huge improvements, and the environmental footprint is just really not as big as some might think. In fact, there's a really interesting stat, just to finish this question off. 3 years ago, a big study was done in Sweden to look at the carbon footprint of batteries, and they arrived at certain values. They've redone this 3 years later, before any legislation was in place, and the results were already 3 times better, just via scaling effects and certain actions of companies such as Northvolt, just trying to make that supply chain more sustainable, and car makers also asking for that. There's been so much improvement that it is simply not a problem today. There's a lot more we can do, absolutely, and we will, and we very much await the European battery law, not only to make the batteries more sustainable, but to also make Europe lead in the most innovative and best battery. And with that, batteries today are just the best solution to decarbonize cars.
So, of course, there's 2 sides. There's, the work that goes into producing the battery, then there's the recycling after the battery is used. But I wonder, from your side, Mr. Vice President, there is also a question about the energy going into it. And so if you have a battery car and you're charging it up with coal energy, for example, then obviously that's not so clean. So, yes, you're making a lot of progress on the battery technology, but how important is the energy source question as well?
Of course, it is important, and when we've been starting with the Battery Alliance, this was one of the key questions to be answered, and I think that a big part of the answer actually was comprised in the Clean Energy for All Act, which we presented and which is adopted now by the EU co-legislators, because according to that curve, which is designed at that time, already by 2030, we will have more than 70% of electricity in our grids, which would be low carbon. So I think that gradually, as we are changing the structure, the quality of the electricity in our grids being more renewable, being more low carbon, and we see that coal is gradually phased out in more and more of our regions, and we are going definitely to accelerate the whole aspect of it with our Just Transition Fund. I think it would have a very important effect on the overall CO2 footprint of the electric vehicles. But I really would like also to thank Julia for really coming with these very concrete figures, because I remember the discussions we had, and I think here we are talking about the CO2 emissions. We are not talking about these dangerous small particles coming from diesel engines for our health, for air pollution, and for all the aspects which are until unfortunately today causing 400,000 premature deaths in our cities because of the air pollution. So all this, I think, combined has a positive effect, which is pointing really to the direction to embrace embrace this new technology. And of course, our ambition in Europe must be to be leader in making sure that the smart mobility, clean mobility would be something which would have a very strong European stamp on it, and it should be our trademark.
Thanks. And Emma, I just wanted to bring you in on the issues around Northvolt specifically, because obviously you have the battery cell production itself is very important, but you therefore have the clients, the car makers who are going to install it in their cars. How important has it been for Northvolt to forge relationships with car makers? And do you think this is going to be something moving forward that you have, such as your project with Volkswagen in Germany? You're going to have a situation where car makers and battery cell producers team up to work on it together.
Of course, that's how we see it. I mean, the fundamentals of Northvolt is building very, very strong partnerships. And why we want to do that is because when you want to take a big responsibility, especially for sustainability, but also for enhancing the development of this industry, you need strong partnerships, both to drive the change, to align and agree on certain criteria for sustainability, but also in order to close the loop and to bring the batteries back, you have to have that strong partnership so that you shorten the way to the market and so that you have as few gaps as possible between the production, the market, and the OEMs. So I think that will definitely be a way forward. I also think that continuing driving this, it's going to be the same. It's going to be built on stakeholders equally important to those that we already have in the family.
And you see also these new industrial sites opening up just outside Berlin. You have the announcement of the Tesla Gigafactory. Then Mr. Šefčovič recently helped open work on the BASF facility just outside Berlin as well. So you see these new industrial, if you like, campuses set up. Do you expect the area around where the Northvolt plant is in Sweden to really be an employment driver, not just for the company itself, but also suppliers and other such firms setting up around it?
Definitely. This is exactly what we see right now, and we are really dependent on this. Not only because we need to create that ecosystem. Already when we moved into Skellefteå, there were a number of players there that plays an important role for us, especially in the supply of certain materials. But also we have some companies moving in that support us in the supply chain with key elements. Also, when it comes to recycling, we have decided to build our own recycling gigafactory up there. The same thing there. It's about keeping the material preparation close to us and to really ensure that we have a short way back for all the materials and that we keep as much as possible as we can with components and raw material feed on this zero carbon grid that we have in the northern Sweden.
I want to come back to the issue of jobs because I think that's very, very important for the debate around the electrification shift generally. But Julia, just a question to you on how the market will evolve. So we heard Mr. Šefčovič say earlier 6 million battery cells by 2025. But of course, this, at least in part, depends on a massive bet by the auto industry paying off. Are you worried that actually there aren't going to be a high rise in the number of EVs sold over the coming years? You know, are you confident that the market is going to satisfy this kind of production of battery cells?
I think this year we have actually seen that the electric vehicle market is really there and the demand is there. Despite the pandemic, we are literally living in Europe in the year of the electric car. The sales of electric cars are surging. They're almost over 10% in many, many markets, which is really triple what it was last year. We are on par on volume with China, which is also impressive. And in some markets today, there are more cars sold that have a plug than have a diesel engine. And you might ask, why is that? And definitely one of the key things at the basis of this is the European policy. It's the European car CO2 standards. We spend a lot of time in Brussels, certainly us as NGOs, complaining and pushing and advocating. We sometimes don't spend enough time giving credit. And I think on top of the European Battery Alliance, the CO2 standards that today have entered force in Europe certainly deserve credit for driving the wide-scale automotive transformation in Europe. The sales are surging, so the market at the moment is proving that it's there. And there's huge potential, for example, in corporate fleets, where we can do much more. There is a bit of a risk. Where will it go in early 2020s? And that's why we're very much looking forward to the review of European car CO2 standards next year, to really ensure that the momentum we started now continues in 2020s, just as electric vehicles actually become cheap and become of the same price as a petrol car.
So do you think, Mr. Šefčovič, that this is going to be something where maybe the European Commission can help nudge the market to make sure that there is enough demand for battery cells produced in Europe moving forward? I guess you're a big fan of the plans to review the CO2 standards for next year.
I think that, just to complement the answers of both the ladies, I think that figures which Julia mentioned are really quite impressive, because if I just simply compared how many cars, electric vehicles been sold the last year, we've been in the area of 400,000, so it was something like 3% of the cars which been sold in 2019 and 2020, despite of all the problems we have. So really we are now approaching to 10% of the share, and we expect that it would be 1.5 million cars sold across Europe. And we see that the percentage of electric vehicles is growing up in all major markets in Europe. And the comparison is that, for example, diesel cars are getting quite significantly down. I think in Germany it was by 80% less than the last year. So clearly the market is, I think, adjusting to this new technology, and very important issue of jobs. I think if I look at the figures provided by InnoEnergy, they expect that by middle of this decade we could have like 1 million jobs created, I would say, in the sector of the whole value chain of battery production and recycling. And one limiting factor, which I don't think that we are covering enough, and therefore I want to kind of focus on it more, and also to kind of put the pointer in our next foresight report. This would be the required skills we need for developing of these industries. Because when I'm talking to the CEOs, definitely to Peter Carlson from Northvolt, he tells me, I mean, I do not see such a big problem in having enough investment or support from the member states or EU institutions, or even demand on the market. What is currently the bottleneck in our sector is that we need more people with adequate skills, chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, all the, I would say, the specialization, which are now in such a high demand in this field, like robotization, automation. So I think what we need to do is to make sure that we would use also the European instruments better to make sure that we would create these new ecosystems around this industry and around these big gigafactories, to include universities, to motivate more all the skilling, reskilling and upskilling which we need to do to make sure that we would have enough of the high quality workforce for our gigafactory. So that was a little bit on the jobs, and I think that the skill issue is really the topic which should be our next priority. And concerning the new standards for CO2 emissions. I mean, we are preparing the big package for the mid of the next year. It would be under the umbrella of minus 55%. And we will look at everything. What can we do more to roll faster the alternative fuel infrastructure? Meaning, to have enough charging stations for our electric and hydrogen fleets, but also to look the standards as we set them, how they're compatible with this 55% target, and I think that it's quite clear that we would need to revise them. But we want to do the proper impact assessments just to come up with a serious, well-based and well-evidenced figure, because I think that this would be also a very important marker for our industry to know what they expect. and what they need to prepare for. Therefore, we are coming with this battery regulation already next week, because we expect that the huge ramp-up would be around 2022, 2023. I think Emma can give us more details what they expect, and I think by then they have to be absolutely reassured that this huge ramp-up would be already manufactured according to these new standards, which which will start to put in place as of next week.
And just to ask you about the jobs issue, because of course we know that assembling electric cars is less labor intensive than it is to make internal combustion engine cars. So there is a risk about jobs, and there is tensions within some big car makers. You know, you look at Volkswagen's management at the moment, Renault as well. I wonder, are you a little bit worried about the potential collateral damage done by a necessary change in the industry, but one that is going to put jobs, especially in your home country, perhaps under question?
Yeah, I know that this is a very serious question, and I remember that we had some time ago the questions with the leaders of IG Metall, exactly on the questions of the electrification, on the requirement of the new skills. But I have to say that in this respect, I'm quite optimistic, because we are also creating completely new sectors of the industry. For example, you know, recycling, reuse, reprocessing of these materials. I would say developing of these new technologies and really bringing the whole value chain into the picture. I believe that we definitely will be on the plus side of the job creation. And as I said, today, what is our major problem is the shortage of the well-skilled people. And I know that we have high skills in our car industry, and they would be the best candidates to upgrade their skills for these new technologies. I think they've been doing it in the past, moving from one type of the engine to another. And really, as you said, the combustion engines are more complicated from, I would say, the manufacturing point of view. But of course, if it comes to the chemistry, if it comes to, I would say, the overall performance of the car, these people will need to be equipped with the new skills. But I think that once you work all your life in the car industry, you learn very quickly, and I think we should just create the best opportunity for them to get these new skills which the Europe will need.
Okay, and just to come back to you, Emma, in Sweden, of course your plant with Volkswagen is being developed actually in Salzgitter, which is where the company makes its internal combustion engines anyway, at least some of them. So therefore there's quite an interesting location thing where the switch between jobs perhaps is more natural. They're located in the same place. At your facility in Sweden, what's the issue there around the local area? Is there existing auto production? Are you displacing some jobs, or is it completely new to have that such a big project in the area?
When it comes to the northern Sweden, we have a lot of competencies up there when it comes to the raw material. But it's very much true that has been expressed now by Vice President Šefčovič about this new industry having an urgent need for new competencies and specialists. And especially our factory that is so integrated, we have everything from expertise in the raw material and chemistry sector all the way through to a certain part that is more resembling the battery assembly, is more resembling the electricity industry, or and then we come to the formation steps. So it's really very different, advanced skill sets that is needed along this 1 kilometer long factory. But one point that I really want to bring up with this is also that when we scale this industry and when we bring all these people in, we have to remember that this leadership that Vice President Šefčovič has really shown evidence of the past years, that's also an enabler for encouraging all the new talents into this new industry. And I think that that's so incredibly important, because the younger generations and those that come to the universities today, they have different drives, and they want to do something out of passion, and they really feel empowered by the mission that we are on, transforming this industry. And I think that itself, proving that we have a leadership, that we take this responsibility, and that we differentiate again and again ourselves from the other global leaders, and that we show the way to this industry being the actual enabler for a clean future. I think that will be the game changer for encouraging young generations to come back in, especially into the engineering professions.
Thank you. And Julia, I mean, from Transport and Environment, obviously you're advocating a relentless push green and to go electric as soon as possible for the industry at large. But is there any specific recommendations you have for the need to maintain jobs in Europe? You know, ACEA, the European auto lobby, always talks about the 14.6 million people employed in the sector at the moment. That's obviously a huge amount of jobs on the line.
No, it's an incredibly important topic, and we are also engaged working on this, and we also work on this as part of the electromobility platform, where we looked into the study, into the supply chain and jobs as well. I would make a few points. I think first, just to stress that it is no surprise in a way that the amount of battery gigafactories that we have coming up in Europe is in line with electric vehicle demand in Europe for 2025. This is how automotive supply chain has always worked. Once there is a sufficient market, the main, most heavy as well, but the main valuable components will be produced close to that market. That's where we lead in diesel supply chain, for example, today in Europe. So driving EV market in Europe will create jobs in the whole of the supply chain. Just recently, there was a study done on the ID3, I think it was ID4, the new Volkswagen electric vehicle, and it showed that 40% of all components for that car already today are actually made by Volkswagen's own subsidiarities. So it is driving that investments in those new things. Now, what do we need in terms of policy? I think it is fair to say that a lot of big car makers are in a good position to transform themselves, and they've been investing. But there's a lot of smaller suppliers that need support and that actually represent the largest part of the value chain today. There's also many countries that won't be able to do it on their own. So we do need to have one European automotive transformation agenda as well as fund. And our proposal is actually to, if we add road transport into the ETS, and we have a separate system for that, to use some of those allowances to actually invest back and fit into this automotive transformation fund, so we can accelerate electrification and not leave anyone behind. And everyone who today produces some kind of shaft for a diesel engine can find themselves in the new supply chain with an equally well-paid and quality job.
And of course, in the existing paperwork for the early feedback rounds of the revision of the CO2 standards that's going to be launched next year, there is reference to the potential to use fine income from companies that don't make the CO2 reduction standards to fund such programs in the future for retraining, etc. However, of course, member countries in the EU aren't so happy about being told how to spend cash by the European Commission. Is this a problem when you need such a coherent approach in things like developing such an industry basically from scratch and handling a conversion such as the electrification drive? Is there a problem coordinating EU member countries, Maroš?
Yeah, of course, always it's a challenge, and I think that's such a gradual approach in winning the hearts and minds of our leaders in the member states for these new areas. But I think in this area we are succeeding, and we can see it, I would say, on the concrete results. I think what would be, of course, very important in the future is I totally agree with both the ladies to be very smart how we would spend the European money in the future. So one of the issue, of course, is the infrastructure, where we would like to kind of use I would say, revision of the 10T mechanism and Connecting Europe facility, where we hope that we'll be able to channel almost 13 billion euros for faster rollout of the necessary infrastructure. Then, of course, we have this very clear mainstreaming goal that 1/3 of the budget should go to the climate-related policies and projects. And I mean, if you just took a rough calculation, it's almost 600 billion euros. We have the EIB where they have even steeper bar, where half of the financing tools should be directed again to the green projects of the future. So I think that with all these financial sources, what we need to do is to really focus on what would be the priorities, what will bring the best value and would help us to accelerate the change we need. And Julia, he knows our policies very well. So of course, ETS, again, it's, as you very well know, up for the revision. Of course, we will have a little bit of a debate over the priorities, because as you know, we are looking at it as one of the potential sources of becoming the new own resource mechanism, which we would need for the funding of the next generation EU. But nevertheless, we are talking here mostly about the European budget or European money. And I think that already over the last 3 years, since we started to be very serious about the batteries, we saw the private initiative and the interest of private investors to put a lot of money in this direction. And I think with the appropriate framework, with the clear guidelines, and I would say forward-looking regulation, that we can actually achieve a lot. And I think Emma also made the reference to the raw materials. I think this was also the issue which we kind of discovered on the road, that how much of the critical raw materials we would need. And when we did our foresight on the future demands, of course, the lithium figure came across as a very staggering 18 times more in 2030 comparing to our today's figures, 60 times more by 2050. I mean, the cobalt, I think it's 15 times more, and I saw that there have been also some questions coming, I mean, in the chat room on other critical raw materials. And I just want to tell that we know about it, and we will be very closely with our industry working on this issue. We developed this action plan for the critical raw materials. We are going to be very active on this issue, prospecting what we can do with our European sources, what we can resource from the countries where they have the same ethical and sustainable rules as we have in Europe. And of course, how can we develop the urban mine approach, where I'm sure that big parts of the critical raw materials, what we need, we can actually get from the recycling. So it's very complex issue, but I think that once you have a support of the civil society, of the driving force of the industry, and I think strong convergence among the member states, this is the goal which we want to achieve together, that a lot can be changed and is developing very quickly. And I think we see it every day, and I'm sure that when we'll have a chance to rediscuss this issue next year, that we'll have even more impressive figure than we have today.
And so we just have a few minutes left, and I wanted to ask about the big elephant in the room when it comes to talking about the rollout of electric cars, and that's not necessarily the batteries, but actually the availability of alternative fuel infrastructure. And actually this is one of the issues where Transport and Environment and Julia is actually on the same page as the auto industry and national governments. Julia, is there a big problem that the European Commission has just not moved quickly enough to mandate the rollout of this kind of infrastructure across Europe?
I think we were partially actually, the problem was the success of how fast electric vehicles have arrived this year. No one was really expecting it. And it is very true that today where we are, charging infrastructure is not keeping at pace. I would say that if we really want to make the European Commission's ambition of 1 million public chargers in 2025 a reality, we need to move fast. And we need to really do something about it now. I've learned in all my experience, if you want a goal to actually be there, you make it binding, because it really focuses people's minds. So the upcoming review of Europe's infrastructure law, RFID, must set national, tailor-made, but binding targets to make this a reality. And two, I would stress that we should also simply put our money where our mouth is. And the resilience and recovery package and all the recovery plans that member states are planning is a huge opportunity to actually roll out charging much faster while we're waiting for the review of the law already next year and the year after. So it's a real plea to the European Commission, to Vice President here as well, of course, that if And when you get those national plans, please make sure that there's clear sums of money committed to charging infrastructure across member states.
And Emma, just to put you on the spot, there's a quick question that's come in about the use of batteries in long-haul transport. There's quite some debate about whether or not batteries, due to the weight of the cells themselves, are really appropriate for use in truck transport. The Northvolt plant, is this something you're going to be looking at too, producing battery cells that can be used in very, very large vehicles, not just passenger cars?
I mean, of course, we have a strong partnership with especially Scania, who I think is really about to prove that it's fully feasible to do that. And I also think that when it comes to the technical development, I mean, we're only in the very beginning of this industrialization of this sector, and I'm very confident that we will see very, very interesting and strong leaps in the coming time going forward. And I also want to agree a little bit with Julia. And I also want to stress that in order to go about within this industry, we really need to ensure that we bring the carbon footprint of the grid in Europe down. So that we really put the incentives on the table that support us and all our partners in being truly sustainable and be having low carbon energy available where we need to produce batteries and charge the vehicles.
Thanks, and we're running out of time. Sorry, Julia, did you just have a point you wanted to make?
No, I can make many points, but I wasn't trying to come
We'll
in
do
there.
a final round. We've got 10 seconds left, but I'm going to push it a little bit further and take up a few more minutes of your time, all of you. So just on the technology side specifically, Elon Musk has said recently, you can make things in labs and you can make small breakthroughs, but it's very, very difficult to scale up battery technology. So when we talk about how many kilometers you can drive on a single charge at the moment, and ultimately whether or not we can get to a 1,000,000-mile battery, is this something that's feasible in the years ahead, or is it going to take a long time to make another breakthrough with batteries? Are we going to have to look to solid-state batteries in the years ahead, rather than have a single breakthrough maybe we can make in Europe in the coming years? Maybe I can put you on the spot first, Maroš.
I think here I am more of a believer of a gradual approach, and I think it's actually quite fast. I remember that how impressed we've been with a 200 kilometers range. Now I think in most of the cars you can get 400, 500, 600 depending on the size of the car. I was listening to Elon Musk recently. He was talking, of course, about the density of batteries and possibility to have 1,000 kilometer battery. So I think all this is evolving rather quickly, and the same goes with charging stations. I remember that when I was opening the first charging point, so that was always like I would say sometimes even few hours needed to charge the batteries, but now we are always talking about the minutes, and it could be extremely fast. So I think that we would really push the technologies we know it to the new boundaries and really achieve the range which is more than satisfactory. Because if we are realistic and if you just check how many kilometers we do daily in our cars, so it's very rarely, very often more than 50 kilometers per day. But I know that it's psychological factor that we want to have much bigger range. But at the same time, I think that we have to invest in this deep, advanced research to open new frontiers, to go for solid-state batteries, because I think that would be, I would say, the next big thing. But we know that, at least when I listen to well-informed researchers, and I know that Emma probably would have more insights on this than me, that we would need to wait another 10 years before this new technology comes around. And I think in the meantime, we will do enormously lot with the batteries as we know it, but of course with the new qualities, with the new standards, and with improved range beyond what I think we dreamt just 2-3 years ago was possible.
And just very quickly, Julia, I know you've actually looked at the figures a lot on this. How many kilometers do you actually need as a range of an electric car? A current battery is sufficient?
Yes, absolutely. And I very much agree with what Vice President Šefčovič was just saying. We don't need to wait for a battery breakthrough to go electric already now. You today can do often 400 kilometers on a quick 15-minute charge. I really would like to talk to people who need more than that in a day, and I've never met one yet. However, does it mean we have to stand still? Absolutely not. The race for the best battery, for advanced battery is on. And that's where we should set very forward-looking strategies and policies. And that's why we very much look forward to the battery proposals in a few weeks' time and set the bar high. So we continue innovating and continue leading and making the best batteries and creating market for innovative companies such as Northvolt to set shop here in Europe. But let's not wait. Let's buy that electric car or switch our diesel and have a shared electric car already now.
Just a final word to you, Emma. You obviously work with scientists who are going to work on the battery technology at the plant itself. Are we on the verge of a huge breakthrough? Can you officially announce that today at our summit, that Northvolt is going to produce the million-mile battery?
I would say that here now is not the place, but I can assure you that the engineers working on this, they are truly passionate. They are extraordinary picky with materials, with what the roadmaps they choose. They are not and they're not waiting for the demand from the market. They are pushing themselves. They are scrutinizing the better chemistry. They are absolutely certain that we will increase performance and that innovation will be coming from inside the battery factories. That I'm absolutely certain of. It's not only the cathode, you have to remember. There's so many other components in a battery where there is a huge interest in taking big leaps in terms of the innovation going forward.
Okay. Well, then, thank you very much. That was a really interesting discussion, everybody. Maroš here with me, and Emma and Julia on video link. Thank you for joining our summit. So that's it for the first day of the Sustainable Future Summit. We'll be back tomorrow with more conversations, including with the Energy Commissioner, Kadri Simpson. So I'm sure our discussions on mobility today will bleed into tomorrow's sessions. We gave you the option of voting in a poll earlier. Maybe I can just get your thoughts very quickly on this issue, Mr. Šefčovič. What is a realistic date to set as an EU phase-out target for petrol and diesel cars? We gave you the options of 2030, 2035, 2040, or no phase-out date at all. Well, I think our audience is split between perhaps the industry and a lot of green-minded people, because there's an equal split of 33% of the answers each for 2030, and then also for no phase-out date at all. Do you have an opinion on this?
I think that technologically it shouldn't be a problem probably already by 2030, but I think it would be more of a public and social acceptance question. And I think, therefore, I think it would be somewhere between 2030 and 2040, I would guess.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Thank you.